everyone. Welcome to our Build Your Business Case for AI and GRC workshop. Really excited to have you here with us today. And we're going to have, a little bit of a variety in this session. We're going to talk a bit about some common AI use cases that we're seeing in governance, risk, and compliance. And you're going to hear from some of the experts here. And then we're actually going to do a live brainstorm and do an actual workshop with a virtual whiteboard and everything. So that will be super interactive. And our goal here is that you're going to leave with a real actionable plan. There will also be some opportunity for demos, so you can kind of see some of the ways that our products are helping with these use cases in action. And should be a great virtual event today. All right, so I'm Emma Powers. My name's Emma Powers. I work on our data and AI business, and one of our, my favorite things to do is really working with clients to scope out AI use cases and looking at sort of how do you kind of look at your business problems, look at your business objectives for your company, and really layer on the ways that AI and technology can help address those problems. And I'm joined here today with Greg, Christophe, and Nelson, who all work on our RegTech offerings in a variety of different roles. So you'll get lots of different perspectives from folks who work across the business on really, helping clients solve a lot of these GRC kind of pain points that many businesses are facing. So I don't know, Greg, Christophe, Nelson, if you guys want to just give a little wave and say hi to everyone.
Hey, everyone.
Hi.
Awesome. All right, so before we kind of get into the demo, the workshop, we wanted to sort of just spend a little bit of time talking about, why this matters and why this is important, especially during today's kind of, crazy moment that we're finding ourselves in. And, as we think about kind of the need for innovation, 2020 has made that so apparent. And, the need to sort of innovate at scale, digitally transform businesses has never been more apparent than how it is right now. And the way that we kind of at IBM think about, how do companies transform their business? How do you think about digital initiatives? It really breaks down into three core areas there. How do we be, more intelligent in our workflows and how we really operate? Resiliency is huge. And I think we're at this point right now in the pandemic where we're a year in. It's not just being resilient, because I think we've all shown that we are resilient and businesses are resilient, but it's how do we get beyond resiliency? So looking at, how do we actually emerge from this period of time even more, even better off because of the sort of challenges that have emerged over the past year. And then flexibility. And this is really huge because as we've seen, that things change kind of by the minute these days. And so how do we create flexible solutions that allow our businesses to perform at scale because of the flexibility? And so all of these kind of three things allow us to really fuel that innovation and that digital reinvention that we are really excited to work with clients on. So I want to dive into a few use cases here on how we're using AI and specifically AI for GRC use cases and some of the ways that our clients are really infusing AI into their businesses. So, ExxonMobil, great example of really being able to take lots of different data that was spread out all over the place in various different kind of clouds, public cloud, private cloud, consolidating that data into a way where they could really analyze it. And in particular, they were able to create a predictive model that allowed them to better drill for a new oil rig. So kind of interesting in being able to take data that was kind of in different environments and really analyze it. Legalmation is one of my favorite examples of AI and how we work with clients. And Legalmation's a pretty small company. It's started out as a startup, but now they're working with huge organizations, including Walmart. And what I love about Legalmation is they essentially were using natural language processing, so understanding lots of different, documents, legal documents, to kind of synthesize what was in those legal documents and actually draft briefs. So drafting legal briefs, which essentially allowed their lawyers and now Walmart's lawyers to spend a lot more time on kind of those higher value tasks and less time kind of digging through lots and lots of data. So great example of really how AI is able to understand unstructured data and allow some of our best employees to focus on higher value work. JP Morgan Chase, this is a great example of a client that was actually able to kind of automate the risk management process. So they were able to look at, how do we build a model and how do we actually automate a lot of the AI processes on top of that model so that, anyone could become a data scientist. And they were really able to make that risk management a lot more seamless. And then NatWest Group, this is a great example. They've been around for, over 100 years, formerly RBS, and they had a lot of challenges related to customer care and client care. And so they were able to build, lots of different Watson assistants that essentially allowed them to answer clients' questions, increasing their NPS scores, and really reducing the amount of time that clients were spent on the phone with agents for kind of, both simple questions, but also very complex questions that they were able to build in. So just a few examples here of, how AI is fueling business, how AI is transforming business. Again, this has never been more important than in today's world. I think we're seeing a ton of use of AI in making businesses faster, smarter, able to respond to customer questions a lot more seamlessly now that, we find ourselves in such a crazy time period. So want to spend a few minutes just kind of talking through IBM's perspective on AI holistically. And this is what we call the AI ladder. And the thinking behind here, and this is, a framework that we use, is that you don't press a button and AI just turns on. Like, that's not how this necessarily works. Rather, it's a process, and there's various business use cases that you kind of need to solve for. And so the way we think about it is the AI ladder is kind of broken into these 4 key steps. And as you kind of, look at, you can start anywhere, but on the ladder, but it's really aligned to your business needs. So as the bottom rung of the ladder, this is kind of the core of your data collection, is what we call collect. And so that's just really breaking down the data, making it simple, making it accessible, allowing it to be in one place, and making sure that you're actually able to access that data. And again, this data could be structured, this data could be unstructured, it could be in notes, it could be in documents, it could be in rows and columns, it could be on the public cloud, it could be on your on-premises, really making sure that that data is accessible. That's kind of that bottom layer. Next layer is organized. So now we're at the point where I'm actually able to sort of bucket it into different areas, tag it appropriately, and that's going to be sort of your business-ready analytics foundation, is kind of organizing that data into different categories so that you're ready to apply those analytics. Analyze, next step. So this is really where we're looking at how do we build this AI platforms. And that's where you're seeing patterns, you're seeing insights, you're surfacing insights from that data, and you're able to really start analyzing what you're seeing. And then finally, and this is what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today, is infuse. And this is where the magic happens. Like, this is really where you start seeing how AI can be applied to business processes like governance, risk, and compliance. And that is that understanding of how do we take this, unstructured data, documents, text, and understand it in a way that can be applied to our GRC processes. All of this, is done on a hybrid cloud environment, so you can kind of move between cloud environments very seamlessly. And of course, at IBM, security is of utmost importance to us, so all of that security is infused into this sort of ladder. So just kind of want to build, kind of start to plant the seed a little bit as you're thinking about your AI use cases, as you're thinking about GRC. This is really the foundation and the framework that we use. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that sort of infused layer that I mentioned we're going to spend most of today talking about, and we're going to really use that as the sort of context of our workshop that we're going to do. So when we think about infuse and we think about understanding that natural language, it breaks down into these kind of core use cases typically. There's, risk and compliance. How do we stay on top of regulations? How do we understand, How do we understand complex documents and apply that? How do you use AI to read a lot of that very, very complex risk and compliance data? IT operations, another area where we're seeing that automation of AI certainly applied into just general IT operations. Financial operations, this is where we see a lot of that flexibility be very important. So how do you kind of forecast during this uncertain period and look at, creating those flexible financial solutions? Business operations, this is just, day-to-day operations. How do you kind of help that COO's office with, business ops and automating a lot of those operations? And then, of course, customer service is a huge one of being able to, really embed that natural language into helping your customers, helping your agents, helping your employees surface information much more quickly. So we're going to talk today about risk and compliance, obviously, because this is the Risk Minds workshop, but wanted to just kind of, get you thinking about the holistic use cases. And the good news is that, once you kind of do one of these use cases, risk and compliance, it becomes easier to then, start scaling these AI use cases across the business. So with that, I want to turn over to Christophe to talk specifically about GRC and show you guys the technology in action. Christophe, over to you.
Thank you, Emma. I'm getting some echo here, so let's see if we can fix that. Okay, I think it's much better now. So if you look at the context in GRC, and you might not reach these levels, but we've seen a lot of customer with 20,000 controls, 60,000 controls, 100 loss events a week, 100 plus regulation change a week to 1,000 issue a month. So this is a lot of data, and most of it is actually in text, right? So you might not reach these levels, but right there, you can see that you have quite a bit of information. So we wanted to go through a set of use case, kind of low-hanging fruit use case from an AI perspective. Some of them actually are a bit more advanced, but here in 10 minutes, we'll do demo and 4 different use cases. So the first one is categorization. So in this example is IT incident categorization against a framework which is called Verizon Verus framework, which is an incident reporting framework for companies across the world. If you look on the right side, these are drop downs, so these are categories for threat vectors, threat actors, things like that. And you have to imagine that the end user is going to have to pick one of these. So put yourself back in the same position when you registered to this webinar. You had to choose the industry, and you never find the right word, or you scrolling down every time. Then most of the time you're going to take the most likely the one that you see here. So if you think of it in terms of data quality, so the user experience itself, then potentially risk and compliance tend to be pretty complex for the first line in general, right? They're not professional like you might be. And they're going to choose whatever they think is right. And most of the time, in order to have data quality to the level you expect to be able to generate reportings like that, you're going to have to spend time reviewing, correcting each of these categorization and make sure you have the right level. Why? Because this is going to drive investment afterwards. This is where you allocate money. This is how you actually analyze where you have weaknesses. So the data quality is super important. If you don't take care of it right at the front, you'll have to correct it during the review process. That's another one for loss categorization. So you have causes, risk events, and impact. This is coming from the ORX framework. And again, you have a set of categorization, and you may not expect the first line, the process owner or other people to be able to identify correctly these taxonomies. And it leads, again, to a set of challenge. This is another one, and you probably have your own, right? It doesn't have to be a standard-based one. You probably have your own categorization, your own taxonomy in there. And again, here you have 70 plus categories, subcategories, and an example in the Basel framework. And you need to find the most likely one, right? And this is going to be super important. You're going to budget next year's based on this information. So if you think of it, any categorization, any taxonomy here is going to impact the user. First, the kind of frustration of trying to find the right thing, and then maybe laziness in picking the first one. And then it goes down to data quality review, reporting inefficiencies, and then budgeting. So the idea here is actually pretty simple, is to understand the intent through natural language processing and surface the most likely categorization or taxonomy, regardless of whichever it is, right? If it's yours, if it's the Basel categories, that's the idea. So for that, we're going to go through a demo. And I think there's quite a number of flags, but we're going to go through a quick demonstration on the solution. We're not going to go through a full demonstration, don't worry. I think I have altogether 10 minutes. But the idea is when you create, here in this example, we're going to create the loss event, we're going to create an issue. And the idea is to suggest to the user the right categorization. I'm just waiting a bit just to make sure you have the view. I think it should be there.
Yeah, we can see it, Christophe.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to add a new loss event. And oh, of course. And is there a lot of lag? I'm just logging in again.
Yep.
Or it's
No,
it's fine now. I found it. It's okay.
I think the screen is
Okay.
loaded, yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to create a new loss event. And at this point, I'm just going to provide a description, right? I'm not going to type a long text or anything like that, but you can imagine you're going to have a much bigger description. And this is going to be sent to the natural language processing, and it's going to try to identify the categories based on the text you provided. So as a reminder, you would have otherwise to select each of these categories, and then when you get to this one, say, oh no, check killing is actually not here, or things like that. So the idea is right through this, you can actually get the suggestion. It's going to show you the top one here, or based on the threshold that you provided. So you see the risk category, subcategory, and subcategory, the risk example, but you can also see the other suggestion. And the idea is you're going to be able to select it, and that's it. And it's going to set the values for you in there. Now, I'm just going to move along because the sharing is starting to share is a bit small, is a bit long, but you can imagine about the same type of suggestion for mapping, right? An issue, usually you want to map it to a control. A regulation change, you want to map it to a control. An exception to a policy, well, to a policy, you want to map it to a policy. A loss event to a risk. So this notion of mapping is another one that you can have. And here, if I say iPhone not configured or policy, and then you can continue and say, well, the setting is not using the right setting or something like that. The idea here, it's going to suggest a control. So rather than going and selecting a control and trying to search for it, out of, I don't know, 100, 200 control here, these are going to suggest you, here it's ISO controls, but it can be your controls, and you can simply map the control to the issue. So this is the type of things that you can do pretty easily in general. I'm going to stop the sharing and go back to my slides here. And this is actually, the slide is about the actual suggestion that you might have in here. So issue to control mapping, loss to risk. And this doesn't have to be against a standard. It can be against your own framework. And the idea is to kind of make this expertise at the hand of everybody. They may not know that you added two controls yesterday. And this will bring up the right control, most likely, and let them choose rather than having to search their keywords. So data quality, mapping, and all that. Okay, I'm going to go really quickly here. You have the virtual assistant, also use case where you can embed a virtual assistant. And the idea is when the first time comes in and logs into the solution, well, they may get stuck. They don't know how to do something. And you could surface, in fact, all these FAQs or assign a language right to them so they can ask the question directly to the chatbot and get the answers. You might have a FAQ document. This is the type of thing that you can load, and it will parse it and kind of be able to surface any section or document that would be relevant based on your question. So I do have a quick demo for that. So let's go through this. So this is really focused again on the end user. It could also be on the admin if you have many admin, but the idea is rather than receiving emails for simple question, you're going to be able to actually directly answer the user with the set of questions. So let's say they're working on a risk and they want to understand the impact. So how do I rate the impact? And this will basically go and look within the dialogue, understand the intent, and then here might ask a few more questions, and you're going to get the answer. But you can say, hey, how do I create a risk? Where do I create a risk? What are my risks? These type of things. So through a different type of interface, which is based on natural language. And then the last use case that I was going to go through here is, there's actually two more. So I need to go quickly. So controls, you have a lot of controls. Some of them might be coming from the library and they're really well crafted. They're really well written. And this is important, right? You spend a lot of time testing these controls, auditing these controls. If you don't write them correctly, at one point, you're going to spend some time on something that is not really well defined. And the idea is through natural language processing, and this is something that that technology is able to do now, is to be able to extract what some people call the 5W: who, what, when, where, why. And if you're not finding any of these, or if you're missing a few of these, then you probably can think that the control is not really well written. And from an efficiency standpoint, this is actually super important, especially when you're dealing with thousands of controls that are written manually by the first line. And then the next one is turn data into actionable insight, right? So Emma mentioned that, but these are technologies where you can actually anticipate and look at patterns and see what is coming. And with a few clicks, you can actually see how the trend is going to go, and you can compare it to others. But it can also look at patterns. It's not only about trends, but what are the most likely driver for something? What impacts your loss recovery? Right? Maybe it's countries are doing it better. Maybe it's in one type of activity. All these can be done through analytics, but that relies on data quality. That goes back to the previous use case. So, oops, sorry, Emma, it's back to you. A quick example just to kind of see what can be done and kind of a seed for the discussion after.
Definitely. Yeah. It's always good to kind of get the juices flowing with some real examples and see the technology in action. So now what we want to do is you see this chart here, and this is kind of blank right now. But as we sort of work through the workshop, this will be complete by the end of the next 40 minutes or so. So we're going to kind of talk through top pain points that we typically see with clients. We'd love to source your ideas for pain points you're currently facing in the GRC space. We're going to talk through, business objectives, and then you're going to leave with sort of some clear ideas on how to apply AI to those pain points and business objectives, and then where to start, like where to kind of prioritize your use cases with a framework and a methodology that we use that really helps prioritize based on kind of feasibility and importance. So that's our goal. It's aggressive for the next 35 minutes, but I think we're going to be able to make it happen. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen real quick. There might be a little bit of a delay here, but hopefully we'll be good. Okay, should be fine. Let's see here. Okay. Hopefully you guys can see my screen now.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Good. So we'd love to kind of hear from you guys. Feel free to put in the Q&A, any pain points that you're currently facing, and we'll be sure to kind of add these in real time to the mural board, which is this whiteboard. But we wanted to kind of talk through some pain points that we typically see with clients, so especially related to GRC. So as we think about kind of, top GRC pain points, they break down into these 5 core areas. There's, the risk of non-compliance. So you think about the fact that regulations are constantly changing. There's a need to stay on top of those regulations. There's going to be high costs of those penalties if you don't stay on top of that. How do we more efficiently kind of identify that risk? So that's a huge kind of bucket here. Another big bucket that we see is how do I actually, explain my AI outcomes? How do I make sure that my models are governed appropriately? How do you make sure that you're sort of testing the model and validating the model on a regular basis, and that there's no bias in your model? So that's another huge kind of area where we see a lot of pain points. Poor customer experience. This is something, that we see a lot of. There's a really high number of support inquiries. Maybe there's, a terrible kind of user interface for first-line users. You're seeing long onboarding processes, things like that, where it's really affecting the end customer experience. Another huge pain point, and I think you kind of saw in some of these examples how that's been addressed with a lot of our clients. This one, focus on low-value tasks. This is huge. Auditing takes a lot of time. Analysts are really, working pretty hard just to stay on top of, all of the risk documentation. Maybe there's, knowledge that's leaving the organization and you're not seeing that knowledge come back. We see that a lot with sort of like baby boomers leaving, that institutional knowledge is leaving. How do we kind of, bottle up that institutional knowledge and make sure that we're able to, keep that in the organization? And then finally, this one's kind of, spans across all of these GRC use cases, but data management. So, the fact that data is spread out across different systems, maybe your, systems are not talking to each other. You're seeing data quality issues, different departments are using different data sets. You're seeing, data privacy issues. All of these things are just very, very common pain points that we see when it comes to GRC. So invite you to add in, any additional pain points that you're experiencing, any things that you want to kind of add here. It looks like we have a couple ideas coming in here. So preparing for future regulations, that's a big one. And that's something where AI can really help. If you think about sort of AI as the ability to understand unstructured data, being able to kind of automatically stay on top of those regulations, huge one. Risk assessments, another one here that kind of aligns to the risk of noncompliance. Somebody added in a lack of agile workflows to the poorly governed models bucket. So additional pain points. I want to just ask, Greg, Nelson, any other kind of pain points that come to mind, or what are you seeing with clients when you kind of break down these pain points typically with them? Is this, any additional thoughts here from you guys who are always working with clients out in the field?
Yeah. I mean, I know that we'll probably hit on some specific use cases later, but one that we've seen recently, and it was actually materialized in some acute relationship problems with the bank's regulator, was the idea of being able to accurately, and in this case, it was actually efficiently classify these loss event elements as they were coming in. The regulator was really looking at this institution for the timeliness. So there was an accuracy problem, but what was really being seen was the volume of loss events were occurring at such a rate, and the lack of skill set in the employee base was really causing these delays, and they were cited for that, and were really, I'll say, encouraged by the regulator to use some technology to accelerate that process.
Great. That's a really great example, and I think a pain point that a lot of clients are definitely facing. It looks like we also have a couple other ones that came in here. There was data entry over analysis, the fact that you're seeing a lot of analysts really spending time on that entry piece. A lot of work to map external content and insights to internal organization. That's a common one, and I think really speaks to both the customer experience piece, but also the data management of being able to get that data consolidated. So these are great, and want to kind of just really do paint the picture of typical pain points that we're seeing with clients when it comes to GRC.
And in fact, there's one,
yes.
Emma, just I'm not sure it's in the mural, but one noted in the Q&A here is just the idea that there are several risk identification and assessment programs, maybe throughout the institution, and being able to leverage, or what I'm interpreting as sort of rationalize those different, I'll say, taxonomies. I'm interpreting some of this, but that came through in the Q&A.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think Yeah, and that leads to another common use case, which is the ability, of course, to relate, because GRC solutions by nature are meant to be aggregators of information and creating context, and the ability of our customers to better relate this content. So, for example, if there's a new regulations, there's a new update of something, how do you relate that back to the framework you've already created and you've defined within the GRC platform? So, whether it's new incidents, new issues, how do you attach that to the framework that you already created in your reporting and monitoring?
Cool. I'm just writing this down right here. Great stuff. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing for a minute here, and we'd love to hear from you. So now that we've kind of, walked through some of these pain points, let's take a live poll here. And if you could kind of, think through for your organization, feel free to select up to 3 of these. What are the top pain points that you're seeing? So, select up to 3. We have compliance reporting, data quality, potential fines, high costs, lack of collaboration, no holistic view of risk, model testing, validation, data entry. Feel free to just sort of take a look here and kind of check off the ones that, apply to you and your business when you think about top pain points when it comes to GRC. We'll just give it another moment or so. Oh, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So. Take a minute to fill out your choices here for the live poll. And just give it another 30 seconds, minute or so to hear from you guys. Okay. All right, great. So it looks like I'm just going to push these results out here. Okay, so coming in, the top pain point, it looks like, is no holistic view of risk. That's a really big one, as well as data quality. So yep, and those two I think go hand to hand, and that's why that sort of hybrid cloud structure is so important, because it's how do you make sure your data quality, your data is consistent, you're taking data from multiple sources. That's going to be really important. So that's great, and then. It looks like other big ones here, no collaboration across first, second, third line. That's a big one. And then we had poor UI experience for first line users also coming in as a top contender here. So thank you for those insights. So now we're going to kind of go back and, especially thinking about data quality, no holistic view of risk, poor UI as kind of the top 3 here. We're going to start thinking through actual AI use cases for these pain points. So give me another minute here to share my screen. All right, hopefully we can see it now. Just give it a minute. There's always a little bit of a delay. Okay, here we go. So here, we talked a lot about AI. I always say the power of AI is understanding that unstructured data. So that data that's buried in documents, in, policies, in notes, and being able to kind of, bring that to light. So if you think about that definition of AI, of understanding that unstructured data, understanding that text, how could you kind of apply AI technology to the pain points that we just talked through? So again, here are some, initial ideas to think about. Would love your thoughts of additional ideas that you have. Put them in the chat. We'll add them in real time to this whiteboard. But, we talked a lot about sort of the auto tagging thing. Christophe showed that. So being able to automatically tag, issues, events, risks, and have that really help your consistent view of risk. And that's going to, help your non-compliance issues. That's huge. And that's a really great way to kind of use natural language processing, use AI to automatically do that tagging. Being able to, automatically regulate or monitor regulatory changes and what's happening and the changing regulations, another great area to really apply AI. You could also see using AI for things like, linking obligations and issues to your controls, and being able to do that mapping in a really efficient way. So just a few examples here of how to apply AI to solve that risk of non-compliance pain point. Poorly governed models. This is another one where how do you kind of actually look at your model metrics? How do you optimize them? Look at, checking for breaches. That's going to help with your sort of risk of non-compliance as well, of course, but also is going to really improve those governed models. Focus on low value tasks. And this was, a lot of you mentioned that sort of the data entries taking away time from the data analysis piece. That really aligns to this use case. So, how do you use AI? Think about using AI to parse through documentation, to pull in FAQs, to monitor those regulations, to, look at kind of how do we create prompts for next steps, and kind of allow your highest performing employees to really focus on that high value work. Show my issues, being able to navigate to things like that. Data management, this is one that's huge too. It's how do we take all of this data and really make sure that our AI actions and the outcomes that we're getting out of these GRC use cases is informed not just by public data, but also by secure data that's maintained behind a firewall. That's probably more important in GRC than everywhere else. It's important everywhere, but very, very critical in GRC. And having that kind of single layer of data governance and that one-stop shop for data governance, also really important, and something that you can do with, the IBM technology. And then finally, a lot of you mentioned, did someone want to chime in?
Yeah, Emma, I just wanted to point out there's an interesting point it made in the Q&A just about the rise, I would say, of importance of integration with third-party content. So as another sort of source of content to be able to sift through. So these regulatory alerts, those kinds of third-party information sources.
I think that's really important, and that kind of sits almost in between both of these. So being able to integrate third-party data into your data management processes, but also being able to efficiently look at all of that third-party data that's out there is going to improve that sort of focus on low-value task piece. Mm-hmm. And then finally, a lot of folks mentioned in the live poll the poor customer experience, the UI issues. So being able to create task-focused views that create much more dynamic navigation, making data visualization more simple and more easy to sort of understand risk trends. Being able to kind of, embed those visualizations into your risk workflows and have that sort of one source of truth. And then also translating, and I know this has come up a lot with customers in talking with them about some of their challenges, in multiple geographies. How do you actually use, what you've created from a UI perspective and a customer experience perspective to in multiple languages and in multiple geographies? So I think that's a really good one. Greg, Nelson, again, you guys are working with clients day in, day out. Kind of other thoughts and insights on these AI use cases and where you're really seeing clients kind of gravitate towards?
Yeah, one of the latest. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Nelson. No, go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things I've seen with in the financial sector, for example, where a lot of our customers that are under regulatory scrutiny or under standards that are global, and how do they translate those into their own common language within the organization and ultimately dissipate those. And again, global organizations don't always speak English, but the original documents and the regulations or standards are in English. So interpreting those and propagating those into their subsidiaries and business units across the world, if somebody is operating just in the Americas, right, you're talking about 3-4 languages. You're talking about Portuguese, Spanish, and French if you include Quebec there. So the idea is how do you quickly and nimbly translate that, and that is a big thing. Or if somebody raises an issue, for instance, in Brazil and it's in Portuguese, yes, with our technology you can certainly classify it accordingly. But how do you actually review that text real time? So natural language translation is one of the services that I've seen a lot of interest in, with our larger customers that have again, a presence across broad geographies.
That's a great one.
Yeah, Emma, just real quick, because I know we're kind of pressed for time here, but just another area we're seeing clients really try to get some efficiency in is applying to the traditional, binder of procedure, if you will, for your GRC functions with a bunch of terminology in them. They're trying to bring those things to life, and one way you can do that is with an AI-enabled chat. So, pulling that methodology guidance, that process guidance in and infuse that into your platform so that as users are interacting with the platform, asking questions in their language, on the fly, getting responses, getting guidance specific to that. And what our clients are seeing and looking for is that cost savings. So the idea of taking that binder that used to sit on a shelf and you'd pull it off to making it a much more dynamic activity that you've actually infused into your GRC platform and into those day-to-day activities.
Yeah, that's a great one. And I think that helps with some of those kind of focus on low value tasks as well, in addition to sort of the customer experience piece. Awesome. All right. So we're going to do another live poll real quick here. So let me see here. So we just talked about some of those kind of patterns when it comes to use cases. So take a minute here, select up to 2 of the AI use cases, the patterns that are of most interest to you and your organization. Risk of noncompliance, poor customer experience, poorly governed models, data management, focus on low value tasks. So just take a moment right now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen again. There we go. Give this another moment or so. All right, starting to see the responses come through. Okay. Take another second or so. All right, so it looks like the overwhelming majority here is data management coming in the lead as one of the, the pattern that really resonates with most, as well as risk of non-compliance. So with customer experience governed models and focus on low value tasks all kind of tied for that third place there. So thank you for those insights. We're now going to go back to the whiteboard. And I'm going to share my screen again. There we go. And we're going to start kind of just take a couple of these examples. And we are going to start kind of mapping them to a prioritization matrix that we use. So hopefully you can see my screen. So let me quickly just kind of walk through this framework as a tool that we use with clients when we're thinking about AI use cases. So obviously we have a ton of ideas here, lots of AI ideas. How do you apply that to GRC? Data management use case seemed to be the most popular among this crew. But, we'd love to do all of these ideas at once, but unfortunately we got to prioritize. So this is a prioritization framework that we use to kind of figure out where to get started first. So high feasibility. So, how feasible is it based on your data, your people, your executive buy-in, and high importance, how important would this idea be to achieving your goals? The ones that are both high importance and feasibility, those are going to be your no-brainers. That's where we want to get started right away. So that's kind of starting point. The ideas that are lower feasibility but still high important and delivering on those business objectives, those are your big bets. So the idea here is you're going to actually leave, today with sort of some idea of kind of thinking about these use cases, thinking about your business. Which ones would you bucket in no-brainers? Which ones would you bucket in big bets? And we kind of go from there. So just to kind of illustrate this a little bit, I'm going to turn to Greg and Nelson again here. And let's just start by taking a few of these here that are in the low value tasks. And let's map these out on the prioritization grid. And then we'll also take some from the data management because that was a popular topic as well. So Nelson, I'll pick on you. If we think about this and being able to kind of process guidance with AI chat, of being able to sort of, use that to improve, cost savings. where would you kind of plot that on the prioritization grid based on your experience with clients? Like, how feasible is something like this based on the data, based on the people to train the AI? How important has that been to achieving business outcomes for clients? Where would you kind of put this one on the prioritization grid?
Yeah, and that one, I think, again, based on my experience and what I've seen in the market, I would say is definitely high feasibility and probably medium on the importance.
Okay, so you'd put this one maybe like utility player, you could probably, have a quick win from it, but it's not going to be life-changing necessarily in terms of like really achieving those business outcomes. But it's a really great one to kind of lean on.
And Nelson, I would say though that I've seen a large U.S.-based insurance company that is really trying to get at that sort of FAQs that are happening sort of every day in the platform or with their employees, and being able to get that. I'd maybe be a little bit more inclined to put that as a no-brainer, especially because the feasibility is, the availability of chat function, is now, much more accessible than it was even just a couple of years ago for these internal business use cases.
Totally. Yeah, and that's where it's like no organization is going to be the same. So what could be a no-brainer for one organization might be a utility player for another organization. It really depends on kind of, how the organization's set up, right?
Really good point.
What about regulation content from third parties? So being able to kind of keep up with that content and bring in that third party content. Where would you guys put this one on the matrix here?
Nelson, let me take a pass at that, and you can tell me or tell us your experience. But what we've seen here is the rise in the importance of it, certainly on the the vertical axis. With the amount of reg change that's been happening, and it's accelerated. I don't have the facts in front of me, but the idea of keeping up with the regulatory change and changing perspectives, especially as we just look in the U.S. The change in the administration, we went from sort of a deregulated state. We'll be moving into, we started in a more regulated state, and the administration came in 4 years ago that really went into sort of a deregulated, or encouraging a deregulated environment, and now sort of looks like we'll be picking some of that back up. The change is what folks are really sort of getting concerned about now. And we now see and interact with a bunch of different content providers that are doing that. And so getting it into feasibility is something that I would put on that sort of the edge of utility player to no-brainer sort of access.
Yep. And I think another example, it would be around your supply chain, right, and the risks that has, and getting the intelligence and live updates of your suppliers, right? So we've seen plenty of examples with the pandemic and some of the supply chain impacts that things have had. So that's another risk that needs to be monitored properly. So it's not just regulatory; it could be something that relates to your just operations, and that could be driven through climate change. There might be some events that happen and impact your suppliers or your providers.
Yep.
And monitoring that information is key. Yep.
Is key. Okay, so we got some good kind of no-brainer utility players here. Let's take one of these. Let's look at sort of one of these data management pieces. So the ability to maintain data behind the firewall. Where would you guys plot this one in terms of your conversations with clients? How, is this a no-brainer? Is this a big bet? What do you think?
To be honest, I'm not sure that we're hearing that as in terms of importance. I mean, I think it's sort of a bread and butter. I would say maybe a rising level of importance. You know what I'm saying? I would say it's not. It's there. It just hasn't been maybe in the headlines as much. Yeah. Cool.
Awesome. All right. So this just gives you guys, a little bit of an idea of, how to think about these. We're going to send you sort of all of these ideas packaged up after the webinar today. But you can kind of think through, your feasibility, your importance based on your company's objectives, and plot these accordingly. So now what I'd love to do is just, have Greg, Nelson, if you guys can kind of talk through, what are these common success factors? What are we seeing as these KPIs? Let me stop sharing my screen again here. There we go. That, really separates the best AI implementations for GRC from the rest of the pack.
Nelson, you want to go first?
Sure. I think it's probably the most important, and this is not just for AI implementations, but any GRC initiative, and it's the concept of a quick win, right? Because a quick win not only gives you an instant or a sort of an immediate benefit, but it also kind of leads into the next couple of them that you see there, right? So you gain leadership and cultural buy-in. So if you are able to implement something, so you have an initiative, whether it's, again, AI initiative, of course, that's what we're dealing with, but regardless, in GRC, getting the sort of top-down support and executive leadership support to get, and also the cultural buy-in, that is accomplished if you are able to implement quickly and you're able to get value quickly, because that will get the buy-in not only from executive leadership but also from the field, from the folks that are out there doing these activities. If they see value, you get that cultural buy-in. So I think that's probably one of the key things that I've seen across the board, regardless of what initiative is, whether it's just simply to bring in a platform that integrates everything and provides some level of visibility, or AI initiatives like what we're discussing now.
And Nelson, I would say, just to carry off on that, is just if you look at where we were, and I say we, sort of the collective we, I'm not talking about as a technology provider, but the world 18, 24 months ago in terms of ability to sort of consume AI use cases in business functions like risk and compliance, there was a lot of mystery. There was a lot of what felt like magic. Emma, you referred to it, I think, a little earlier on in your presentation. That there was this idea that, hey, I'm going to throw some data and something magic's going to happen. And what I think we've learned, and certainly our clients have learned, and I think in general, we're realizing, well, you got to be a little organized about this. That in order to get the value out of AI, there are some steps, as we alluded to in the ladder, that that is there's some reality there, and we've reduce that amount of time, to execute on a quick win. The training for natural language processing is these things that you train by example. So there's no coding involved. Those kinds of things I think are really helping to accelerate these quick wins. Today, especially I'd say compared to even 12, 18 months ago.
And it's actually, Greg, one point on that I think is fascinating. It is sort of complementary. You can actually create sort of a virtuous cycle of saying, for instance, if you're able to train and get training of AI capabilities that will make your data better, right? So if you're able, for instance, like Christophe showed, you're able to classify your records better, you're able to relate information better, you have better data that can then be used to further apply AI. Because like you said, AI is not magic. It's based on data, and the quality of the data is key. So you can almost start applying AI to get better data quality, which of course leads to better decision-making and better information and insights. But at the same time, that same data can also be a sort of the fuel for further AI initiatives.
And I think that sort of last point we have here around metrics is, doing AI for AI's sakes. I don't know, it might be a little, have a little bit of value, but really I think what we want to be thinking about are sort of, what are the impacts that we want to have using these? So things like, reducing regulatory fines. How can you reduce that exposure? Tying that to an AI use case. So the example I talked about earlier of a bank that was, they were having some issues with the relationship with their vendor, with the regulator. now getting that accuracy and the time improved is going to put them into a position where they're not going to be as exposed. I'm not saying they wouldn't make a mistake, but they at least have the evidence and the processes in place to have a rational conversation with their regulator, with their board. And so that I think that tying, metrics, whether it's performance or goals like we have here, onto some of these use cases is also it can be really helpful, because if you can't see it, you can't measure it, then what do you have? It becomes really important.
Definitely. Like, it's all about solving the business problem and the outcomes that clients are seeing. So that's great. All right, so we are at close here. So, what we had promised in the beginning was this sort of, completed picture of looking at kind of AI ideas for GRC use cases that you can really apply to your business. So here's a bit of a mock-up of what that could look like. We'll send this to you post-webinar. Feel free to take a screenshot of this and sort of some, top pain points that we've identified, as well as the AI ideas to really apply to them. And then some of those kind of no-brainer ideas that we sort of scoped out together with the prioritization grid. So feel free to kind of take a screenshot of this. We'll send it as well and kind of bring this to your stakeholders as kind of a starting point for building out your use cases. And, we know, too, that this is just the starting point. Like, this is, a 1-hour webinar. You can't expect to kind of solve all of your solutions, solve everything here and kind of really scope out that AI use case. So we would love to, work with you one-on-one. You can click, to schedule a one-on-one meeting. I believe it should also be in the resources tab. You can also email, feel free to email me directly. My email is emma.powers@ibm.com, and we can make sure that you get into the right hands in terms of really scoping out that AI use case for GRC and talking through your specific needs. So thank you again for being part of this workshop with the Risk Minds and IBM. Love to continue the conversation with you. Again, this is just the beginning of thinking through kind of your AI use cases for GRC. We're happy to work with you one-on-one and make sure that we can kind of, help you build out those big bets and those no-brainers, and look forward to continuing the conversation. So thank you all, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.